Welcome to Conversations on the Coast, the Bay Area's premier author interview program. The Paradise Guest House is the title we'll be talking about today. It's a novel by Ellen Sussman. It's published as a Ballantine Books trade paperback original. How did I do on that, Ellen? Pretty good?
Very well. Thank you.
Thank you for visiting with us.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
This is your third novel. The first two, On a Night Like This, was one title, and French Lessons were both national bestsellers. Now, it seems to me, following your novel career, you love to travel and you love to write about travel.
That is correct.
Yeah. Last time you took us to France, and
right.
This time you transport us to a very exotic locale, Bali.
Yep, that's right.
And being a good researcher, you went there. I like that.
What a girl's got to do.
Yes.
It is a tough gig for a writer to have to spend a month in Bali doing research, but
Good.
I sucked it up and I did it.
Well, let me know the next time you go and I'll pray for you. I'm worried about you. The Paradise Guest House takes us into Bali at a very specific time, 2002 to 2003. And 2002, we need to be reminded here, is the time of the terrorist bombing of Paradise.
That's right.
And 2003 is a year of a memorial event held 1 year after the tragedy in an attempt, I guess, to bring closure?
Yes, and to heal, to move on, to come together as both as a country and to bring some of the survivors back from other countries. That's correct.
And the novel, in a very creative way, I think, moves back and forth between these 2 years, 2002 and 2003.
Yes.
Yeah. In a sense, you began your research just 6 weeks after the bombing?
That's right. It was my husband and I had planned a vacation to Bali, and this was actually after the second bombing. We knew of the bombing in 2002, and everyone said don't travel to Bali.
Yeah.
And then about 3 years passed, and we were very much ready to see Bali, which I'd heard so much about. And then right before our trip was planned, there was a second set of terrorist attacks in the country, not as horrific as those in 2002, where over 200 young people from mostly tourists from other countries were killed. But in the second set of bombings, there were about 20 people killed, and again, tourist destinations were targeted. So everyone told us to cancel our trip, don't go to Bali. It's so clearly a dangerous place. And my husband and I both felt that there was, that we needed to go, that there was some reason why this felt very important to us. So off we go to Bali, and it turned out to be a very interesting time to be there. In 2 weeks, we never saw another tourist, which if you go to Bali now, you would see that's shocking.
Never another
not
tourist?
One tourist, not in a
Goodness
restaurant,
gracious.
not on the beach, not at the hotels. So it gave us a chance to see a different kind of Bali. And it also gave us a chance to get to know the Balinese, who were very much suffering. They are a very peaceful, loving people. They are their religion, which is Balinese Hinduism, is very much a part of their lives. We started to learn a lot about them and how their lives had been turned upside down since these terrorist attacks and how much the country was suffering. So even though this was purely a vacation for me, my mind was just kind of churning the whole time. And by the end of the 2 weeks, I had the idea for the novel I wanted to write that turned out to be The Paradise Guest House.
One of the things that gets into your book is an understanding of the religious belief of the Balinese.
That's right.
Particularly the aspect of their belief called reincarnation.
Yes.
Did you see that firsthand and talk to people?
Very much so. What's interesting, sometimes I think that I write to help myself understand things that I can't understand. You might think that writers write to spout off everything they know in life and want to tell readers.
Oh, dear me, some of them do, trust me.
But I actually think that it's much more interesting to write a novel where we, the writer, actually writes to discover, to learn. And one of the things that I couldn't understand about what we had witnessed in Bali was how sort of the disconnect between the spectacular paradise, the truly beautiful country, and terrorism, and these very peaceful, loving people and terrorism. So while I was writing, I was trying to learn about Balinese Hinduism and trying to understand it. And when I went back for that month of research, 5 years later, it was in 2010, I spoke to a lot of Balinese about this, and their first response almost always was, fate made this happened. It was fated to happen. So be it. We move on, which is, of course, very different from an American response to terrorism.
May I quote from the book? One of the characters says at one point, and I don't know how to say his name, "There is no reason for my anger.
Yes.
It does nothing.
Yes. Right.
This has happened, so it was meant to happen.
Isn't that astonishing?
I accept my loss."
Right.
That's an absolutely astonishing response.
Right. And that was so hard for me to understand that I needed to enter that world to try to write about it. Now, I also, it's Neoman is the character's name.
Neoman.
And what he
I've
later
got to cut in here
point,
because we're going to go to a break, and I must say that the Paradise Guest House has many, many interesting, unforgettable characters. And when we come back, we're going to focus on one of them, Jamie Hyde.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Follow us on Twitter at JimFosterCoc or send an email to jimfostercoc@gmail.com.
Our guest today is Ellen Sussman. Her book, her new novel, is called The Paradise Guest House, published by Ballantine Books. And in addition to being a trade paperback original, the publisher brags about the fact that this book is also a Random House Reader's Circle title. What be that?
It's actually a very nice honor. It's one of those books that they believe will reach a wide audience, and that one of the ways to make that happen is through book clubs and readers' word of mouth. It's an odd book to categorize because it is both a love story, it is about a terrorist attack, it's about recovering from that attack and moving on in one's life. So it doesn't fit very easily into probably one shelf in the bookstore. And I think by making it a reader's choice, reader's circle choice, they're hoping to reach a very large audience.
Well, all those facets are your fault. You put them in there.
I accept all responsibility.
Made it hard on poor Ballantine and Random House.
That's right.
Now, the writing is very, very good, and it's absolutely fantastic in a couple of places. One of them is the actual bombing scene, I guess we should call it.
Yeah.
And I'd like you to read rather extensively from that place where we discussed.
Okay,
it starts
great.
with "they cling to classes." Tell us who the they are.
Great. Gabe is an American expat who is living in Bali, and he has just taken his sister to the airport, is in a kind of bad mood, and sets up to meet an old friend, Theo, at a bar in Kuta. So they're having a drink and catching up.
Great.
They clinked glasses, and the room rocked with a thunderous boom. There was a pause between the sound and the movement, first the roar, then the rumble. And moments later, while everyone seemed to hold their breath, glass broke, from windows and walls, cracking and splintering, smashing on the floor. After another split second of eerie silence, screams filled all the space of the room. Terrifying, ear-splitting screams. Gabe was standing, though he didn't remember getting up. He watched a blur of people run out of the restaurant. He looked for Theo. Where did he go? When did he leave? The cook stepped out from the kitchen, his mouth open in terror, his hands over his ears. Earthquake? No. Somehow Gabe knew. It's a bomb. And then the second bomb, bigger, more forceful and violent. The ground under Gabe rocked, the walls sagged, and then, as if the earth were about to split open, the mezzanine of the restaurant buckled and crashed to the ground. The lights went out. Gabe stumbled toward the door in the darkness. He fell over someone, then bent down and lifted the waitress to her feet. You okay? He asked. His voice was lost in the noise of so many screams. Can you walk? He shouted. In the dust-filled haze, he could see her face, streaked with blood. Let's go, he yelled. She stared at him as if she couldn't understand. He wrapped one arm around her waist and pulled her along with him, pushing over toppled chairs and tables, bumping into someone headed the opposite way. The waitress buckled over, then pushed away from him. Leave me alone, she shouted, and fled in the other direction, back toward the kitchen. Should he go after her? Should he be leaving through a back door? Were there more bombs waiting for him on the street? Go, he thought. Keep moving. The air was thick and putrid. He could smell something chemical and something burned. Skin, he thought. Burning skin. He pushed through to the door, knocking a table out of his way. Someone behind him, the big guy who was the owner, called out, Everyone stay calm. Don't panic. Walk toward the door if you can. We'll get help for those of you who are trapped. The cook wailed, drowning out the calm, measured tones of the owner. Gabe stumbled over something, a part of the mezzanine now crushed into planks of wood. And when he looked up, he saw that he was in the street. What happened to the front of the restaurant? He felt a blast of heat. Across the road, the Sari Club was swallowed by flames. Did the fire set off an explosion? No, a bomb set off the fire. He could feel his brain sluggishly trying to make sense of this, as if it too were shrouded in dust and darkness. Bombs in Bali? At nightclubs? The scene in front of him made no sense. In the smoke and darkness, he heard horrific screams, words called out in Balinese, Indonesian, English, and sounds that had no language. He could see a wall of fire at Sari's, and then, when he looked to the right, he saw more fire. Was that Patty's Pub? The second bomb? And I'll stop there.
And that's a great reading.
Thank you.
I don't want to get any closer to bombs going off in restaurants than that reading. What a terrific job.
It was interesting. In that month that I spent in Bali, some of the surprises came from, some of the best information came from the most surprising sources. So a guy who ran one of the guest houses that I stayed in happened to be having dinner at a restaurant near the bombing that night. Mm-hmm. So he's the one who described what it was like to be in a restaurant nearby and the mezzanine falling, and he gave me the idea of placing Gabe there rather than anywhere else. I changed a lot of the details around, and he certainly wasn't as graphic, but it was wonderfully helpful to get a kind of account like that. I also talked to many of the Balinese survivors from the bombing and families of the victims and learned all of their stories as well.
Well, I'll tell you something. We didn't do anything for Jamie Hyde in that segment. When we come back, we're going to do that. And in addition, we're going to talk about some people's favorite character. His name is Bam Bang.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Follow us on Twitter at JimFosterCoc or send an email to jimfostercoc@gmail.com.
The Paradise Guest House, a great novel published by Ballantine Books, written by Ellen Sussman, and Ellen is with us. And we have one more segment to go, and We haven't gotten to the main character, or at least one of the main characters. Let's go back to the explosion moment. In Patty's Pub, there we find Jamie Hyde, a very beautiful and complex young woman from Berkeley. What else do we need to know about her?
Well, she is there on business. She's an adventure guide who works for a made-up company, an adventure travel company. There actually are a bunch of them in Berkeley. And she's young. She's 31 years old. She's fearless. She travels the world. She's very independent. You sometimes hear writers say, do the worst possible thing to your characters. And for this young woman being caught in this terrorist attack and suffering the consequences of that is probably the worst possible thing that could happen to her. But she's plucky, she's very spirited, and she's determined to recover from the terrorist attack, and that is the reason why the book opens with her returning to Bali a year after the attacks for both the ceremony that she's invited to and to find Gabe, the man who saved her.
Yes, and she's hoping that finding Gabe will become a reunion.
Yes.
But here's what happens. They see each other. She can't speak. Her mouth feels dry and unfamiliar. He reaches out and touches the scar on her face. She remembers how he would change her bandage, his fingers so gentle on her wound. Now, even though the skin is numb, a jolt of electricity runs through her. She trembles, and he takes his hand away. She watches his green eyes. She waits for him to speak, but he is silent. I came to say I'm sorry, she says finally. She hears the words in her head, and they reverberate as if she's been saying them over and over again for months. And in a way, she has. Jamie, he says, and then he shakes his head. His hand reaches toward her face again. This time, he touches her lips. Please, he says, go home. That's a terrible moment.
It is a terrible moment.
A terrible moment.
It is the last thing she expects. It is, she'd been ready for so many things in her, in her dream of what it would be like to reconnect with him. To set that up, let me say, when he finds her at the club, they work together to save many of the injured people, and then she is injured herself when a part of the ceiling collapses on her. And he saves her and takes care of her for a few days. And what happens in those few days is very, very intense. And she doesn't know if it's love. She doesn't really know what it is, because they had come from this chaotic experience and they bonded on this very, very deep level. And she's very confused. So, I think that is true. I think that when people meet in terrible conditions, that the connection between them is sometimes more so charged and so much more intense than it might be if you meet somebody on OkCupid, say.
Yeah, no, and that's exactly the kind of relationship that the book probes.
Yes, right.
As fiction, not as psychology, not as some kind of a textbook.
No,
but
that's right.
It's very moving, all that they've had together during that period, and then she comes flying back, and he says, "Go home."
Yeah.
Now, thank God the book doesn't end there. And thank God there are other people in the book that we can give our attention to, among whom is Bam Bang. Who and what is Bam Bang?
So Bam Bang is a young street kid. He meets Jamie on her first day back in Bali. She arrives in Ubud, a mountain town in about an hour from where the bombings were. And he tries to help her out. He tries to offer his services in many different ways. He may or may not have stolen her wallet. She's not quite sure whether she wants him to disappear forever or become her new best friend.
Well, that wallet stealing is, you leave that up in the air. We never really know whether he stole her wallet.
That's right.
Or it was what did he say? Some dirty old man who lives in a cave.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was Bam Bang's idea of who stole the wallet.
That's right. But he does step in to help her when she can't find Gabe and realizes she needs someone's help. He's the guy that she turns to, and they become buddies. Also, he comes attached with a dog who never leaves his side, and she makes good friends with Bam Bang and Tuk Tuk along the way.
Good old Tuk Tuk. One of her best friends is not with her on that in Bali. One of her best friends is her mentor,
boss.
The boss named Larson. Right. What about him?
Well, Larson was developed in in this book in a later draft. I wanted her to have this older man as a mentor, as a dear friend. She's been very disappointed in her life in her father, who has failed to be there for her. Mm-hmm. And so this mentor really plays an important role in her life. Unfortunately, he is dying of pancreatic cancer, and it is one of the things that Jamie is both fleeing from and trying to figure out how she can wrap her mind around being there for him. She knows that she needs to be there for him. She's just not ready to do it. So this journey to Bali is also, in a way, a journey to give her the strength to be there to take care of him in the end.
Jamie is going to be a character you'll fall in love with if you have the good sense to buy the book. The book is Paradise Guest House. It is by Ellen Sussman. This has been Conversations on the Coast, and I'm Jim Foster.
Follow us on Twitter at Jim Foster COC or send an email to jimfostercoc@gmail.com.